Yeah.
All right, this is our AACG meetup for Friday, July the 24th, and we are so pleased today to have Richard Whiteley as our guest artist. And Richard has recently joined Corning, and he's going to tell you a lot about his work and also about his new position at Corning. So, Richard, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you. I'll start by sharing my screen. Let's just make sure that that works. Can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay, so that's the kind of title landing page here. And thank you, Marilee. And there's a number of people in the audience here who I know. So hi to everyone that I know and hi to everyone that I don't know. And I'm looking forward to meeting you. I've loved this series and it's a great pleasure to be a part of it. And thanks, Marilee, for managing them and putting me on the ticket here. So I'll talk a little bit about my work and my practice. In the first half, I'll talk about my thinking, et cetera, and then I'll stop for some questions. That first half will include some studio shots, you know, how I think about my work, how I'm working in the studio. And the second part of the
Bill
talk,
and Amy are on.
Yes, Bill and Amy are here.
Did it start early?
Sorry, I've got some people I need to mute who came on and are speaking. So I'm going to.
Sorry, I'll just keep going then.
Thank you.
In the second part of the talk, I'll talk a little bit about some research projects that I've been involved with. I've been teaching in Canberra for many years before joining Corning. And also I'll talk about some of those projects. And then right near the end, I'll talk about a very exciting project that we're working on here at the studio of the Corning Museum of Glass. So I'll start with just a little bit of context. This image on the left here is the flyer for a solo exhibition that I presented at the Shanghai Museum of Glass that opened in April of last year and ran to October. Feels like 10 years ago now. And that was a combination of works from about the past 8 years with some works that were made specifically for that show. And as I was preparing for that show, Corey Hampson from Hampson Gallery approached me about picking up the work after the museum exhibition closed. He actually flew to Shanghai and worked with the museum to make that happen. I was really delighted about that. And Corey and his team hosted the work as part of Art Palm Beach. That was in February of this year, just before we all went on extended lockdown. And I was delighted to attend that event and introduce the work to America. But in between that time, I moved from here, Canberra, Australia, where I'd been head of the glass workshop there for 17 years, to the Corning Museum of Glass. And I'm just so delighted to have joined the team here. I'm working with Amy Schwartz's team, and we're planning a significant expansion to the studio, and I'll talk about that at the end. I thought I'd start with some biographical information. I started working in glass when I was 16 years old, and this is the first commission that I worked on. I was an apprentice in a small town in rural Victoria, outside the city of Melbourne. That's the southern state. It's a smaller state in Australia, but it's many times bigger than Texas. This commission was for 12 sets of these windows, and it was in a town called Wonthaggi, which is in far eastern Victoria. So obviously it was a pretty big commission for our little town. And the way I came to starting that apprenticeship is that I was in high school, and the art teacher brought in a visiting artist who showed us contemporary stained glass, Joachim Prinstrom and Johannes Schreiter, and these kind of German contemporary artists. And I was amazed. And he said at the end of the talk, "I'm looking for an apprentice." I just stuck up my hand, and the next day I dropped out of school and undertook this apprenticeship. And I've kind of thought about that moment, because I've been working in glass ever since. And years before that, I'd been an altar boy in a church, and I remember vividly being kind of covered in the light from the glass. And perhaps it was that, but when I was given that opportunity, I took it with both hands. This image that you're seeing, as I was saying, is the first window that I worked on. The person in the front here is my father. You can just see him in that foreground there. And he was in this image was only taken a couple of years ago. He was in a nursing home at the time, and I took him out for the day and we journeyed back to this place. He couldn't see very much at the time, but he enjoyed it a great deal. And a little homage to him, he passed away just a couple of months after I took this image. After I finished my apprenticeship, I wanted to learn more, and I'd been taking night school to actually finish a high school qualification. I did a series of drawings in this art school preparation program, and I completed this drawing when I was 19 years old. It was part of the portfolio that I used to get into art school. And I show it because I was quite interested in learning skills and understanding the materials that I was using, even at a young age. And this is a very young photo of me, first year at School of Art in Canberra. Klaus had just moved to Australia the year before and started a glass program. So when I applied, I was accepted by Klaus, and I moved to Canberra to study with him. This is me on the left as a first year student, and this is Klaus on the right. No excuses for our sense of fashion back then, but what we lacked in design sense, we made up for with our enthusiasm for our glass studies. I wanted to talk about Klaus just for a moment because he was a very unique teacher. There were no classes. There were very few, if any, set projects. I think in the 4 years I studied with him, there was one demonstration. But he expected us to kind of get in there and to experiment, to basically to push our own ideas, to fail, to try again, and just keep going. He expected us to dedicate ourselves and to look within ourselves as we developed the skills that we needed to explore our ideas. And how he set up that program, the architecture that he used to set that up, is still present in that program today. And that's why that program in Canberra has graduated so many extraordinary people over the years. And it was a privilege to come back many years later and run that program. While I was a student with Klaus, I received a scholarship from the Australian government to go to Pilchuck and study with Professor Lebinsky and Mrs. Brechtova. And of course, this was an extraordinary experience. It was my first time in the US, and it was the first time that Professor Lebinsky and Mrs. Brechtova were allowed out of what was then Czechoslovakia, which was obviously still controlled by the communist government. The classes that they taught was partly about technique, but mainly the syllabus was about exploring and investigating ideas. We did life drawing every day, and we only undertook one casting, and many of those castings failed. There was enough differences in the equipment and in the materials that were available in the US to what was working very well in Czechoslovakia that most of the castings failed. But that really didn't matter. We were so excited to work with them and to get a sense of their thinking and their methodology. And it was parallel, but it was different to Klaus's. They, like Klaus, had a high respect for material, but they were never beholden to the material and never trapped by the tradition. So there was this kind of seamless integration of ideas and materiality, and it was just such a pleasure to spend time with them. I'm actually in this photo. I'm the skinny little kid in the background here. I remember them taking that shot so vividly. After I finished my undergraduate degree, I was offered a scholarship to study at the University of Illinois with Bill Carlson. And that was a very informative experience again, but in a different way. Bill was a highly elastic thinker, and he had a great understanding of contemporary art. Also, we had Chicago, the art world of Chicago on our back doorstep, which we would visit every month. Glass was part of the sculpture department, which is a number of US programs run their departments that way. So I was introduced and experimented with a lot of different materials, sometimes not even working in glass. After I finished these studies, I returned to Australia and I was offered a position at Sydney University. So I started teaching full time, and it was at that time I decided to dedicate myself to cast glass. And I thought it would take a year or two to start to realize my ideas, but it took another 10 years for me to develop the vocabulary and enough skill to make the works that I'd imagined. Cast glass, as many of you will know, is painfully slow. It's kind of like bronze casting on Valium because of the glacially slow process of making the molds, and then of course the enormous amount of time of annealing anything of scale. My work draws from those earliest experiences in the stained glass studio. I'm really interested in the phenomena of the material and its relationship to light. The broader concepts of such as sublime and transcendence are both ideas that light can evoke, and I'm really interested in how these ideas I can weave them into my work, and how that research that I was doing at university becomes part of that vocabulary. So this work is called Subvert, and it was probably about this time, 2008, 2010, when I felt my work had reached this point where my ideas, I was starting to realize my ideas. And so what I'm trying to do here is that negative, so this is a block, rectilinear block of glass, and there's this voided form through the glass that I'm trying to give a sense that that void is a palpable positive of light. The piece is called Subvert, and the idea is that this void of light is being subverted, is being pushed under and pushed through. So there's a lip on the front here, and that lip is like this, it's puckering up as if the light is coming through and affecting the glass surface. Here's another work in that series. It's a bit thicker and it's a darker glass, so you get this kind of brooding quality around the edge. It's about 8 inches thick, and it was it's in the collection of the National Gallery of Australia, and it was on display when I left Australia in their foyer. I often use minimal forms to frame these voids. I'm drawn to the geometry, and it serves as this frame to create these structures around these voided forms of light. And I want that light to hover in the glass. This work is similar. It's got a flat front, except for this lip, which bulges at the front here. And at the anterior, you have this compound curve, and it's the internal optics of the glass that are creating this tonal gradation within it. The thickest part of the glass is actually this halo rim here, and that's about 8 to 10 inches thick, but it's been polished at the end, so the light travels through that in a different way. Here, let me give you another shot of that. Oops. And you can see that angle there. That looks like it's hollow, but that's a well that's full of glass, and the light moves through that. So harnessing light has been a big part of my practice. This is not one of the stained glass commissions that we worked on. This is a European a reference image. But I put it in here to talk about the idea of light and how elusive it is and how hard it is to define. And that's not dissimilar to the material of glass. Glass is both a wave and a particle, and light is a wave and a particle, and glass is both liquid and solid. We don't usually get to see light traveling. We can often see the source, and we see where light hits something. But it's when light strikes glass, it refracts and scatters and it reflects. Therefore, glass is a great medium for shaping and sculpting light. So obviously I'm drawing from my background in stained glass, but also when I got to university years later, I started to study different depictions of light as a metaphor for communication, for transcendence, and for knowledge. And light, as many of you will know, is central to many cultures around the world through different times. In the Christian medieval era, which is synonymous with the development of stained glass, there is this depiction of light as this connection point to God. And here, that classic Gothic painter, Fra Angelico, he's made visible these rays of light to communicate this idea of the word of the Annunciation. And what he's doing is making visible something that would be otherwise unseen. So in my own work, I've explored these ideas as well. This is the largest work that I've produced. It's about 70 inches tall, and it's in the collection of my new home here at the Corning Museum of Glass. And within this piece, I was exploring the idea of Cartesian theory, that relationship between the body and the mind, the separate idea of consciousness and the idea of the physical body, and manifest with this kind of block, the top, and this idea of the head, and this idea of the body in this very architectonic form. The voids here within these pieces aim to capture the idea of consciousness and the physical life force. It's a metaphor. These voids are a metaphor for this energy within the human body. We can't see them, but they are reflected in the physicality and the actions of our body. Again, the lip on the front surface that's bulged, as if the voids are spewing out and affecting that, that form, that rectilinear form on the outer. And I like the idea of this kind of industrial and organic being collapsed together. Between these sheets, between these blocks of glass are two sheets of lead. And I kind of see lead as this alter ego. It's soft and it's malleable. Glass is anything but soft and malleable. A key reference for me comes from architecture. I've spent a lot of time looking at architecture, particularly when I was in graduate school. This was one of the first pieces of architecture that I really had a strong connection with. It's many of you will know this architect, Tada Ando, and this is his Church of Light, and it's in Osaka, Japan. It was made in 1987. And he's a prolific writer, and he writes a lot about the relationship of materiality and light. The idea of this void, you know, he's reinterpreted the east end of a Christian church, which has its connections to medieval and Gothic architecture, and he's reinterpreted it in this neo-brutalist way. And it's just, I remember seeing this chapel for the first time and just going weak at the knees because of the sheer beauty of the light. And it becomes this illuminated positive within the space, even though it's a voided glass space. This is probably the closest that I've come to emulating that concept within my own work. This work shows the inherent contrast of material. Glass is full of these contrasts. Glass can be this incredible chameleon. You've got this soft halo of negative form that is coming through the glass, and then you've got this really brutal saw mark on the front here. And I was actually using a diamond saw, an industrial diamond saw, to thickness this piece to get the right balance of the halo coming through, because you can never, I'll talk about that a little bit later, you can never just pick it just right. You have to kind of carve the work to affect that. And I was going to smooth it out, but I left it raw because it just worked at this really great counterpoint to the soft halo. This is the back of the piece. You can see those soft edges of the glass and that polished lip there that allows those other layers of optical effects to come through. This is an image of Tada Ando. It's one of his sketches, the architect I was just talking about. And here he's basically just working with geometric voids, and he's interested in how they change the psychology of the space. He's done a lot of writing about architecture and the politics of walls and the politics of spaces. And I draw on that a lot within my work. Within a quote that he has is, I believe that the emotional power in architecture comes from how we introduce the natural elements into the architectural space. Therefore, rather than making elaborate forms, I choose simple geometric forms to draw delicate yet dynamic displays of light and shadow and space. And although I'm not working in architecture, I'm really interested in this idea of these geometric forms creating these possibilities for this reflective moment, almost like a meditative space. Color is also a key component within my work. I spend a considerable time with the team at Bullseye, and we develop colors for these pieces. Quite often, this is a single casting, and you can see here this quite bold color in the middle, this aqua, but although that's quite a bold color, it works because it's got this halo around the outside of it, which creates this frame for it, and it creates this kind of location for the intensity of the power of light. This is more typical of the tonality that I'm using in the work, where there are these more muted colors, and these pieces are cast separately and then roughly cold work glued together, and then the cold working is finished. There's another element within these works, which is you're seeing them in a photograph. We've got a very good photographer, but these are very adimensional. During the course of the day, these forms change quite dramatically as the light in the space changes. You can see here where I've used this tonal shift towards the bottom of the vessel here. I quite enjoy that sense of, has it got a liquid in it, or is this part of the architecture of the piece? And then there is this softness on the surface where you have an obscuring of the form inside. You can get a sense of it, but you can't fully know it until you move around the piece. In my more recent work, I've been working more directly with ideas of the physical body. We all have relationships with our bodies, good and bad. And the idea of these internal worlds that we can see through these very powerful and sophisticated tools like MRI gives us a sense of what lies within us, but we'll never truly know that. We'll never truly see it. And I've drawn from these images quite literally. As I was developing, I was looking back through my drawing book, and as my parents were becoming quite elderly, we were spending a lot of time with doctors, obviously reviewing scans and making those difficult decisions. And before I knew it, these forms were appearing in my sketchbook, much more asymmetrical, much more bodily. And you can see, I say this series started about 2016, but if I look back to works like Soma, I was probably dealing with the body even back then. And here's a detail of that work. You can see here where I've left a texture on the work, and then this area here is all carved. So there's an empowering of this interior void. You can see here where the interior asymmetrical void is becoming more dominant, and it's punching out, and it's affecting that exterior form in a more deliberate way. These last two pieces, two of my favorites. They're quite small, but these pieces are cast just square on the outside, and then all of this shaping happens afterwards. And it was partly as a result of my training with Klaus. Klaus said to us as students, when it comes out of the kiln, whether you're a glass blower, whether you're a kiln caster, a kiln fuser and slumper, it's a blank. And that's when the work starts. I took him very literally, and I've done a lot of, really developed my strength as a cold worker, probably more so than my skills as a caster. So that transformative process happens after the piece comes out. And that's quite different. That, I think, speaks to Klaus's location. Obviously, growing up in a glass cutting family in Germany, where, it's close proximity to Bohemia, and that whole tradition of the Czech cut glass is quite different to the Venetian tradition of glass blowing. So again, these pieces, I'll take you into the studio now and start to show you a little bit of my process. I spend a lot of time drawing and making models, which I'm doing plenty of at the moment. Here, what I'm visualizing is not what the glass will be, but what the void will be. So I start from the inside and I work out. So here I'll start building clay on the outside here, and this will be a void that runs through what the glass will be. Or I may start with an image, a rendering directly from an MRI or something like that, or something in my sketchbook. And then this is a refractory material that I've prepared. It's not just straight plaster. So I'll carve this. I'll literally draw onto it and I'll start carving it. And I do that because I think there's a much more of a spontaneity in working with these materials in your hand. So it's a bit messy, as you can see, but then I go through a process of smoothing that out. This is a very large form, about 30 inches tall. And then these refractory anchors, which secure it into quite large molds. That's about 35 inches in long dimension there. And then they get loaded, or you can see the scale there. That's about 250 pounds of glass that'll get loaded into that casting. That's at the Canberra Glassworks in Canberra, Australia. And then we're reloading the glass during the casting process. And that's at top temperature. So that's quite a lot of glass. It's about 70 kilos in this one. So that's about 160 pounds. And this one's about double that. Or not quite double that. So then you have to wait until you grow a beard before it comes out of the annealer, because it takes so long. But that's that particular piece finished. I'll take you back into the cold working in just a minute, but I just wanted to show you, fast forward to the end point with that piece. You can see here where this surface has been reduced down, that's all been carved away, and that front surface was all carved away as well to balance that light. When they come out of the kiln, they often look like this. They often look quite raw. And there's quite a bit of time of negotiation with the form, of shaping it, getting a sense of balancing the translucency of the color. Here's a piece that's almost done. And we're deciding, how it's going to be positioned and which surfaces we're going to polish. You can see there, that's the finished piece. So I've polished those ends, and that allows a little more light into the piece. There's a lot of feedback that's happening in that shaping process. It's kind of like I cast the work and it gets me roughly in the ballpark, and then the work really starts and I discover things about the material as I'm working on it. So here, this whole top area had to be reshaped. I wasn't happy with it, and that was carved within the work. So I do a lot of, this is, I'm just jumping back for a minute to talk about another reference point for me, another architect, the Finnish architect, Juhani Palasmaa. And in his book, The Thinking Hand, he talks about the relationship between materiality. And the essence of his book is that it brings us back to the understanding, that tactile experience is really important to understanding craftsmanship and technical skill, products of the body. It doesn't all happen in the head, and how necessary that conversation is for the realization of all art and architecture. I've never much had time for that separation of concept and technique. It makes me quite frustrated when people talk in those terms. And I think for ideas and material to work, those notions have to be interwound. It's a big part of my practice. It's certainly a big part of my teaching. And the way I work is that the hand shows me possibilities, and that the hand has the intelligence and that tactility to present opportunities for me within my work. We do a lot of tool building and jerry-rigging things within the studio. For 20 years, I've worked with the stone industry, adapting tools that would normally cut stone into shaping and cutting glass. And here's a good example of a piece that's come out of the kiln. It's very raw. I'm trying to emphasize these negative funnels that are coming down here and I want to create a lip, but I haven't cast that in yet. I'm trying to understand how I'm going to do that. This is the finished piece, a piece called Flood that Aaron so beautifully put behind him as his screensaver. And I was really happy with this work. You can see it on the side here. Those edges are polished again to allow a little more light in. But if I polished the front, it would have revealed too much. It would have been too literal. And so that softness of that front surface allows that play of light. I don't always know. I have an idea when these come out of the kiln, but I don't always know what will be polished and what will be left matted. This is one of my assistants, Take. He's a great assistant, and he's here. We've got a piece of wood with a diamond sandpaper on the end, and we're using that to finish that interior shape. So all of these pieces are shaped by hand. They all have that that sense of there's a number of tools that are used on them. I use a big bridge saw to shape these, but the final finishing is all done with hand and emery paper. And it's this is the most recent work. These works are from the past. These works were made just 2 years ago. And I think this one annealed for about 2 months. It's about 10 inches thick. And then I'm starting to become quite interested in notions of atmosphere. So that's something I'm starting to think about, and how light moves through not only space, but moves through the material itself. And one of the key references for that, who I'm starting to look at, is Turner. And I started to look at him through a conversation that I had with my colleague, one of my best friends at the Australian National University, who's Tim Senden. And Tim is the head of the Research School of Physics and Engineering. And he was doing his postdoc at the Academy of Museums and Sciences in Paris. And that's right next to the Louvre. And they had a whole bunch of Turner paintings. And he told me about this experience he was saying, did someone bequeath these? You know, how did you guys get all these Turners? And they were explaining to him that the scientists were actually collecting the Turners as he was painting them. Turner, unbeknownst to Tim and myself at the time, I went off and researched that. And I was trying to figure out what they were doing with all these Turners. And they had been collecting them because Turner had read all of Newton's theories on light. And then when Goethe's book was translated into English, he devoured that book and incorporated the principles of Goethe's ideas of light and how it moves through the atmosphere to help him understand light within his paintings. The scientists were then acquiring his paintings and putting them and studying them. And I thought it was such a beautiful story where the scientists were drawing from artistic practice. So Turner actually was titling some of his paintings after chapters and after phrases in Goethe's book. And how he's captured light within the atmosphere is something that I find quite a parallel to light moving through the material of glass. Glass is like an atmosphere. It's not dissimilar to light moving across the sky. These are the last couple of pieces that I'll show you. This is the front shadow fold and the back. So I thought that'd be a good place to stop and let you ask some questions about my practice. We've just run at about 35 minutes, so I'm about on time. I thought we'd do 5 or so minutes of questions. Then I've got another kind of 20 minutes about, well, 20, 25 minutes about sort of some other crazy projects that I've been associated with that relate to my work and relate to other things. So maybe I'll stop sharing my screen and we'll come back to gallery view. So if you have any questions, please unmute.
Richard, I have a question. There were a couple of your pieces that, and I don't know the word in when you're casting, but it would be in Calmos, all I know, in blown, but it looked like two completely separate colors. How does that work?
Very painfully slowly. So think about casting one piece, and basically I make that internal void, and then I do drawings around it. I sometimes mock things up in cardboard, and then I cut that voided form in half and make two separate molds, cast two separate pieces, cold work them halfway, glue them together, and then finish shaping it and cold working. So it's a ridiculous thing to do, but I really enjoy that sense of horizon line and the different moods that the different colors can create. So it's a way of, you know, that single color form, I think works on some forms, but I like, you have to be careful introducing color because it can really overpower form very quickly. So I spend a lot of time just, you know, making sure that the two colors work together. Occasionally I have to kind of cast them again because I don't get the colors right. But yeah, it's two separate castings.
Richard, it's Jim Flaws. I noticed it's kind of follow-on about colors. I don't ever see your work in pinks or reds or purples. It seems to be a lot of shades of gray, some blue, and so forth. Is there a reason for your choices of colors? I'm sure there is.
Yeah, Jim, great question. And absolutely there is. I think it goes back to that first slide lecture I saw of these German stained glass artists from the 1970s, 60s and 70s had a profound effect on me. And they all use this tortured blue-gray. A lot of the colors, it's hard to see in these images, but with clever glass chemistry, as the glasses get thicker, they certain minerals become more evident. So I've got a piece in my studio now. Let me do this. Marilee, how do I make it just me on the screen?
Should be speaker view. I see just you on the screen.
Okay. Can you guys see that piece down there?
Yes. Wow.
Okay. So that looks very green in this particular daylight. And then under a photographic light or a different artificial light, that goes very gray. And there's actually a blue tone in there. So ideally, I love that shifting of tones within the glass, that there is this layering. But I've always just, I think, had an attraction to this more somber colors. It's something that connects very strongly with the Czech aesthetic and the German aesthetic. And when I've worked in more vibrant colors, my feeling is that it overpowers the architecture of the form too much. So I kind of steer clear of those. But I'm trying new colors all the time. When I work with Bullseye, I've stopped giving them like, let's work with a gray palette. I more say, let's work with this kind of tortured, bruised type of color. So there's a lot of descriptions around emotion and emotive ideas rather than color.
Thank you.
Yeah. Richard, Judy here. I just want to comment about the color thing because Dale Chihuly has a brand new show at Traver, and he designed the display, and the glass is an incredibly complex weaving of techniques, but the style is monochromatic. So it's all about the line, and he designed the exhibit at Traver Gallery in black and white, and it's a straight line down, and it is black, white, and glass, and it is exactly along the same kind of aesthetic that you're talking about as to why you are using the color that you are using. And I would highly recommend that if anyone has a chance to look at what is there and how your thoughts and feelings about balance and or something Dale is thinking about. And by the way, Dale is in really, he did a wonderful video of his health while he was doing this, and he was fully engaged. It was wonderful to see him that way. But I have a question for you. You mentioned 2 years ago some of your work. You're in a new position right now. You're in the middle of a pandemic, and you have a challenge to do something new for the school. So can you give us a snapshot as to how you're balancing all this and how that's happening for you now?
Well, thank you for the question, and let me answer I'll make a comment about Dale, but I'll answer that first one first. We've got a lot to do at the museum, and my studio practice will be on hold for a little while, but it's never stops. I've got a lot of model making to do, a lot of drawing to do, and my work is much stronger when I invest in that time. So I'm going to spend the next year or so developing those models and drawings, and slowly I'll start with smaller works. I've set my goal of making 100 models before I make anything in glass, and I've still got 50 odd models to go. So it's the kind of project that I'd set for my students, so I'm giving myself some of my own medicine. And we're really busy at the museum. We're working on some very exciting projects, and we're all trying to navigate this pandemic at this time. But my practice, I've always worked this way, where I've spent a lot of time teaching or working on other things and then getting back to my practice when I can. My practice, I need a break from it. When I wasn't teaching and working full time, I became, I think I make better work when I can put my head somewhere else and work with other people and then come back to it. So that seems to work with me. And then as far as the Dale show, it's stunning. We happened to have an opportunity to see it last night through some images, and it's stunningly beautiful. I think it's one of his best shows.
Isn't it extraordinary? It's breathtaking. I mean, if you ever get a chance to look at it when you're right there after you see the video, it's unbelievable a human hand could do that. I mean, it is such complicated techniques, and it flows so beautifully, and you go, yes. And then when you realize what goes, it's just unbelievable. It's wonderful. So there we are.
Richard,
thank you.
This is Artist Bartle in Houston. I've been an early collector of your work. When I look at you, I see Robert Irwin and James Burrell, land artists, LA school, but their manipulation of light and your ability to manipulate the light, your minimalism, and your incredible line has truly reflected what they believe in. And I just want to let you know that I'm a big Terrell fan, I'm a big Robert Irwin fan, and of course I'm a big fan of yours. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that comment. I also am a huge fan of Terrell, and we had the opportunity to meet him. He did a work at the Australian National Gallery, and we had the opportunity to sit with him and talk with him about his work. And it was a highlight of my career to spend time with him and talk about ideas. So thank you for those references. They certainly are artists that I've looked at.
Hi, this is Jerry Silverstein from Santa Fe.
Hi, Jerry.
A couple of questions that usually come up around work by casters. There's always a percentage of loss in casting, and what's your percentage, and how long do you normally, those smaller pieces, how long are they in the kiln?
Yeah, thank you for that great sobering question. Losses in cast glass are very high, and I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes. Depends on the year. I had a lot of luck when I started, and then as the forms became more sophisticated, particularly the hollow core castings, I started to lose pieces 80% of the time. And I had to do something to change that. I just couldn't afford to keep going. I share a lot of information with people like Dan Clayman, Karen Lamont, and everyone's great. We all share information. And they really, cast glass does lag behind. It lags behind kiln forming, certainly hot glass, and now even the pipe network. And I'll talk about how we're going to address that a little bit later. But yeah, I have lost a lot of work, and because of the research that I've undertaken, the technical research I've undertaken, I lose a lot less these days. But I think it's part and parcel. It's just such a slow, primitive process. It takes so long. If you don't flash something at the glory hole, it falls off the blowpipe and it hits the floor right in front of you. You see it, and it's instantaneous. In cast glass, it could be months down the track before you see you've got a problem. And then you've got to remember all the way back to what you did that you think created that problem. Cast glass happens in a box in the dark. And so you've got to be a forensic detective to figure out what went wrong. And you get a good therapist and you have lots of good friends.
Yeah. Thank you.
I wanted to thank Meryl Lee and thank Richard for this talk today. This is great. I just posted a link to Richard's catalog we produced. If anybody has a chance to check that out, we'd be grateful. And I'm super grateful to be part of this today. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Meryl,
Richard,
should I
got a quick question.
Yeah.
May I?
Corey.
How are you?
Yeah, I'm great.
I know, and I just don't know if a lot of the members of the AACG know, how long you worked on this body of work for the Shanghai Museum of Glass, which, by the way, is an incredible institution. I suggest that every single person on the Zoom research that museum, because it's an incredible experience, as well as enormous institution. But how long did this body of work take you to create for that particular institution?
Yeah, thanks, Corey. There's about 8 years, works plucked over an 8-year period, and then 2 years of dedicated work towards that particular show. So I did very little else in that time. I had a team of people working on it, and it was the biggest undertaking, 16 works, some of them very large. So yeah, about 8 years, that probably 2/3 of the work that I produced over an 8-year period. So a long time. Go ahead.
I have a great question for you. What did you do after Bullseye?
After Bullseye?
What kind of glass?
Oh, I still work with Bullseye glass. I used to use a number of different glasses, but I think Bullseye have been great, just that they'll answer the phone and work with me for the colors that I want to make. We work on a few projects together. They've had a strong connection to Canberra. So they make a soda lime glass, and it works well for what I've tried high lead glasses, but they don't work as well.
I asked you about lead many years ago. I remember that.
Yes, yeah, and I was working with a high lead glass for a number of years, but was having some problems with it, and I just found the soda lime works better for me. So,
good luck.
Yeah, thanks. Marilee, should I jump back to the rest of the talk now?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. So then I have to do share screen again.
Mm-hmm.
And we go to that one. And I wanted to go, whoops, no, don't want to do that. I want to go to this one. So can you see questions?
Questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, and so you can see this one, this image of me working on a piece, about 2006. So in this part of the talk, about sort of 20, 25 minutes or so, I'll share with you some of the research projects that I've been working on, some of the commissions that I've been working with, and then right at the end, I'll talk a little bit about the studio at the Cornell Museum of Glass. So these first two projects I'll talk about are directly related to my studio practice. And the first one is Annealing Research. So this is a large piece that I was working on in 2006, and this is what happened to it. It sheared itself in half. And as I've often done, there was a lot of time and money lost here, about 3 months worth of work of materials and salaries. So I've tried to improve my knowledge. And as I said, there's a group of casters, we all share information, but there are big gaps in our knowledge. It's like you're swimming along and then the tide goes out and it's the glass casters who are the ones who weren't wearing their swimming suit or their budgie smugglers. So that and a number of other failures I worked with an electrical engineer and started to do some testing about how we could solve some of these problems. Most of us read our annealing charts off sheets and then we just hope that that works out. But there's a better way, and that was introduced to me by the team at the University of Arizona in their mirror lab. They have, I believe these are the largest pieces of cast glass in the world. It's a borosilicate. It's about 8 meters wide. You can see the scale of it. And at top temperature, this kiln spins. And there's 200 thermocouples in there, and it's all controlled by quite a sophisticated computer that puts the heat where it needs to be. Well, we studio artists aren't going to be able to afford that. But what we can do is take that principle and apply it to our studio practice. So I spent a lot of time doing little wiring setups like this, trying to get more data out of the kiln. And eventually, with the help of the engineer, we built this little interface. So this is the computer controller. And then you can team up these thermocouples over here in these pairs. So you can enable this and then set what's called a delta T mark, which is the spread of temperature. And you bury that in the mold or on the top of the glass or under the mold to get a reference point. And you can set what the displacement of those two temperature points is. So I wanted to make it really simple for people to use. No one has bought this idea, but I used it in my own work and got reasonably good about it. And then I went around the world at the invitation of people like Bullseye and Hiker, and I gave lectures on annealing, and this is what happened. People fell asleep. This is up in Scotland. Hiker Brockwell and I were invited to share our technical approaches to our work. She's at the Royal College in London. And she was talking about her work, about her mold making. She said, now Richard's going to talk about annealing and you're all going to fall asleep. It's so boring. So pretend like you're asleep. So she took this photo, and then I love to show it when I show my students to talk about annealing. But I came back to that idea of that work almost 10 years later. And with the knowledge that I gained through that, I was able to resolve some of these more complex pieces. And this was a piece that was also, I produced for a show that Klaus and I had in Berlin together. And then it's in China at the moment, but we'll be getting it back for Corey and Aaron just as soon as I can. Another project that I worked on was a public art project, and that a large supplier of water in Canberra, the water supplier in Canberra came to me, and a utility supplier came and said they're building a new dam and they want to build this big sculpture and they want me to cast something really big out of glass. And after I told them there's no kiln that'll anneal it and the annealing time would be about 3 or 4 years, they said, well, let's look at another material. So here I conceptualized this compound curve, which is based on Lorenz's attractor, which is the basis of chaos theory. He was modeling evaporation currents of water and found in this random data, if he graphed it in a 3-dimensional plane, it created the butterfly wings. And I thought that was I've thought that's a beautiful form, and I wanted to utilize it, and it seemed quite appropriate to apply it to this new dam. So I built this out into this 3D model and I showed it to them. And originally I was going to make this as a negative void. This shape was going to be a negative void through a block of concrete. And I modeled that to show them what the void would be. And they said, we prefer the void more than the hole, so go away and make that. So I went away and we made this very large form out of plaster and styrene. And then we had to make a mold. And this is the mold that we made. And then we filled it up with concrete, 15 tons. And this is at our home with the 2 cranes flipping it, but it worked out really well. It's the first and last time I'll work in concrete. It took me about 3 years to make this work, and I was really proud of it. It's about 120 inches tall, and we had to do things like polish the surface of the mold. But I worked with a team of engineers to help realize this work, and I've ever since I've called engineers like lawyers for materials. You have to negotiate with the lawyers to get what you want. And it worked out very well. We spent a lot of time working with sculptors who help make the molds, but we always had to answer to the engineers. So those research projects happen alongside my teaching. For 17 years, I ran the program in Canberra, and that was the program that Klaus started back in the 80s. After Klaus retired, the late Stephen Proctor ran it for 9 years with Jane Bruce, and then I started there in about 2002 and left there at the end of last year. The program retains that architecture of what Klaus had set up. The students need to develop their own voice, and we are there to assist them and guide them, but the students write their own syllabus. I'll just show you a handful of students. This is Claire Peters, who graduated in 2016. And these are fused blocks. And then she's used a gold lettering that she's put on the sheets between them to create this three-dimensional form between the sheets. Hannah Gayson, who developed her own kiln forming process of squashing kiln form glass and then cutting it up and reorganizing it to create these imaginary maps. And Madison Zabel, who worked in cast glass as much as I told her not to. She developed these installation type pieces. Now, these three students that I've shown you are all undergraduates, and they've all were from 1 year, one of the last years that I taught there. And they all had work, they all became professional artists after they graduated, and all of them have had work collected by museums already. One of the first students that we graduated was April Surgeon, and I just recently reconnected with her, partly because this is her first solo exhibition just after she graduated. And she's an extraordinary talent that most of you will know. But we had a friend who's on the call here. I installed a piece in their office in downtown Corning, and it sits right next to one of April's pieces. And I think I'm more proud of that than most other things. So while I was in Canberra, we were asked to undertake a number of commissions. So there were a number of visiting dignitaries. His Holiness the Dalai Lama came, and we were asked to make a gift for him. And we would go to the students and say, look, so-and-so's coming. We've got a few months to make a gift. These are the kind of values we're thinking about. Let's pitch some ideas. And we saw it as professional experience opportunity for them. And then the idea of being able to deliver, we would manage the project with them and always have a backup plan, but we always delivered on time and usually on budget. In the last 4 years, we were asked to make the Australian of the Year Awards, which is quite a high profile commission. We did all the state awards. These are the state awards on the left, and that's the national awards on the right. And here we've developed a design that represents the multifaceted nature of Australian society. We've got the Southern Cross, the constellation of the Southern Cross embedded, and also the Star of Federation here, the seven-sided star. So they're kind of loose references from the flag of Australia, and the clients loved it. They thought it was great. We came up with this color coding. So this is Young Australian of the Year, the very talented Ash Barty, Australian tennis player. And so this project now goes on without me there. I designed it, we set up all the production systems, and now a student manages it by themselves, employing other students as they need. It's about a $50,000 to $60,000 a year project. Another project that we worked on was a recycling project. A company came to us and said, we're taking glass out of the waste stream and we're turning it into architectural products. Could you help us with some color options? We want to color these. And we said, sure, you know, we'll do that. So we started, as he was leaving, he said, oh yeah, and occasionally they break. And I said, yeah, incompatible glass coming out of a wheelie bin. And he said, what's incompatibility? So he said, can you help us solve the incompatibility problem? And so there is a problem with these granulated glasses. Some of them are different types of glass and they can't all be fused together. But we did about 800 tests and I had a series of research assistants working on it. The colors were pretty easy to organize. The incompatibility, not so much. I lent on my friends in the sciences and they helped me with some very fine photography. And we found that if we could balance, everyone knows what the vitrification is. It's where glass forms these crystals. So we found with those little granules, if we could just grow the vitrification in this kind of Goldilocks zone, just enough, but not too much, we could get the pieces to micro crack along the seams, and thus it would stop it from rupturing. Once we solved the vitrification, completely eliminated, the pieces cracked all over the place. And when we grew the vitrification too much, it was too porous and it would stain with wine and things like that. So that was great. We felt like we were really onto something there. And then they had another problem. They couldn't cold work them. So they brought me back to help them repurpose these old tools, and we got it to polish. And so these are the products that came to market. Everyone was very excited about it, and they built a tunnel kiln to speed it up. They spent $500,000 on that. Couldn't get the tunnel kiln to work, and then went into receivership almost overnight. So the project, which I still think is a great idea, just stopped dead. A separate project that each year we take our students to the Classics Museum to handle ancient glass. Part of that is because we want them to have a really good understanding of the skills from antiquity, and they can learn a lot by handling these objects that are 2,500 years old. We have a small but a really good collection, and these particular pieces, often we go back into the studio and we try and make these objects as learning experience. So this is a Hellenistic vessel, it's a cast vessel, and we use it as an introduction to glass casting. So these are first year or second year students who are taking a glass class, and they learn about the history, they learn about contemporary glass, and they develop some skills along the way. And this is a project that we did on cameo glass. This student had never cut cameo before, and we fused two sheets together and we're introducing the techniques, and it usually is the case that 2 or 3 students can engrave better than I can. And this student was a painting student, took to it like a fish to water, and just loved it. While we were working on that project, we have this small piece of cameo at the School of Art, and I was able to handle this cameo fragment many times. And the accepted thinking of cameos is that they're blown. You know, there's a bubble of blue glass and the white glass is gathered over the outside, and the design is cut away from that to reveal this pattern. And from my own practice, I have a pretty good understanding of the surface marks that you need to affect the glass. And what I was seeing on this particular fragment is that some of those marks didn't seem to align with the cold working that I would normally know. Here's one example here. You can just see that I've got a little ring around it. You've got this little bulge of blue glass which comes up to the same level as the white glass. So that's quite unusual, and that's normally not what you would see if that was a blown process. And then on the back here, you've got these very weird striations, which to me, they don't look like they were applied cold, they look like they were applied hot. But perhaps after being buried for 2,000 years, these marks were affected by the burial. So I asked my friend Tim, whose team had just invented this machine in the physics and engineering department. This is a high resolution X-ray tomography scanner. And I asked if we could put the cameo fragment in and have a look. And he's like, sure. So we put that in and we got a lot of data out of it. And just like, this is a whole lecture in of itself, and it's unfinished research. It's still ongoing. But what you're seeing is the backside of the piece, and we've made the blue glass transparent. So what you're looking at is not a slice through, but you can see how the white glass is attaching to the blue. So you've got these very large open face bubbles and this granulization of these little particles of white glass, which look very much like pâte de verre. But what you've got in here is you've got about a ½ inch, which looks like a bubble, but it actually isn't. It's full of blue glass. And it's blue glass that is mixed with fine little particles of white glass. So it would appear that this piece has been sintered. My colleague Tim, who did his PhD in bubble theory, who does a PhD in bubble theory, he's like, no, this was particle glass and it's been sintered by the heat of the blue glass being transferred into it. So I've spent some time in museums around the world, and I've looked at other pieces of glass, and I found some evidence to support that and some evidence that contradicts that idea that the white glass was powderized. So there's much more research that needs to be done on that project. And I'm starting to work with some of the people here, and we're talking it through, but there's just a whole bunch of testing that needs to be done. Really, I think there should be more artists who are working with historians and sharing that knowledge, so we can get a better, relationship between people with practical experience and people with, historical experience. There's very few artists. My colleague Bill Goodenrath is one of the few people around the world who is an expert in both areas of history and materiality, and it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to work with him. So we come to Corning. We moved to Corning. We fast forward 2,000 years from Roman glass. We come to Corning in last October, and I've left my job there, and I've migrated to work with the team in the studio. Amy Schwartz invited me to join her pretty incredible team, and it's such an honor to be a part of this museum. The studio that Amy and Bill have realized has been part of the museum, I think, for almost 25 years now, and it's internationally regarded. I've taught here a number of times, and we've sent many students here. We have a high regard for it. Many of you will know the programs that we offer, high quality classes, artist to artist teaching, an incredible series of residencies that we have that bring in people from all over the world. And we also have a residency that includes a year-long, it's a year-long residency that's held in conjunction with Corning Incorporated. And that's where the artists get to work with a team of specialized glass researchers and also their equipment. This year we have Beth Littman working with us for that residency. Her residency is on pause at the moment while we get through this crazy pandemic. And it's such an amazing opportunity to contribute to that cutting edge program. One of the big reasons that I've been brought here was to help realize plans for a major upgrade of the studio. And that project we're calling is Studio Next. So what we're wanting to do within this plan is to build a studio that we're looking sort of the next 25 years out, and what will the studio community need? And we want to be the destination for that community going forward. We want to be an international center where artists and students from all over the globe will utilize our facilities. Sorry, there's a little bit of a typo that's happened up here just as I've shared it onto this screen, and it should just say Studio Next in all one line. But our 5-part plan is to, The first part of that is to right-size the facility. The facility has gone through one major upgrade, but we're bursting at the seams. Normally in summer, we are 5-6 people deep in what we call the make your own glass experience. We want to build a facility that will accommodate more people. We run a fantastic residency program, but we're fitting that around our classes. So we want to build the capacity within the studio to meet the demand. One of the reasons that I was very attracted to the facility is that we want to build a glass casting center. There really isn't one at the moment, and this would be the first, certainly in the US. We want to take on commissions in that center. We want to help artists with rentals who perhaps don't want to invest in a major kiln, but want to build large work. And we want to undertake research and publish that. As I said earlier, the medium of cast glass has lagged behind, and I think there just hasn't been an open source of information. If you think about hot glass, it had the Pilchuck experience. Information has been shared globally and openly for decades now. The same with kiln forming, the same with flame working, but cast glass has lagged behind, and we really want to put that right. We want to build a residency center so we can offer more residency programs. We want to bring people to Corning. We want artists to relocate here and make Corning a community beyond the walls of the studio. Another idea that we want to try and realize is a training program. I've got a background in that, and there's a number of people on staff here who have a lot of experience with teaching, and we want to develop a training program outside of the university structure where we can graduate the next generation of artists, teach them how to work with the material, and also teach them the critical reflective skills. And I think there's place for that in the academic, as different to a university academic program. The other advantage here at Corning is that we have a really diverse campus. We have a library, we have curators, we have researchers, and I think we're well placed to support these ideas. So the final part of the upgrade is to integrate other parts of the museum together. The studio sits across the car park, and the expansion of the studio will help link the library and other parts of the campus together physically as well as through the programming. So we've been working with architects. Amy and her team have been working with architects long before I got here. And they've been fundraising for the facility. That fundraising is currently on pause for obvious reasons, but we hope to recommence that soon. And when we do, we'll certainly be in touch with everyone. So that's my talk for today. It's from our new home here in Corning, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the first part or the second part. I promised myself I wasn't going to go 2 hours. So I've only done 1 hour and 15, so I think that's pretty good.
We still have a good group of people with us, so.
Yeah.
This is Bo Weisberger. Richard, I saw you, but we didn't actually meet at Corning at a Glass Art Society meeting, must have been around 2001. They had an event called the Mold Making Olympics.
Oh, yes.
Where they gave a little clay, wax mold to a group, I think 4 groups, and each had to make a mold out of it. And 3 groups, they were busy making a mold. But Richard gave a lecture while he was making the mold and explained what he was doing and how he was putting the sprues in and why he had to put them in various parts of the mold. And I got a short glass casting course in about an hour or an hour and a few minutes. It was really extraordinary. So I'm sure that what you bring to Corning as a teacher, even though it's going to be a little more abstract and extended than that, is really going to be very strong and very great for the program.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm really excited about being here. I feel I've joined an extraordinarily talented team, and I've got a skill set that complements the incredible skills that they already have. So I can learn. I've certainly learned a lot while I've been here, but there's a lot of teaching experience within the staff profile already. It's just different teaching experience. So we work together on that, and I'm helping with some programming where I can at this time. We're working on some online classes, which we're hoping to launch in the next couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks.
Any other questions? If you have questions, please unmute yourself and ask them. Now is your chance. And Corey has given his number, so you can call or text him if anybody wants to buy anything. Richard, this was absolutely fabulous. So yeah, no pranks, he says. I'm going to prank you, Corey.
I have a question if it's not too late.
Go ahead.
What will the online classes be? What will the subjects be?
We're working on classes at the moment for kiln forming, so I'll be doing one. We're hoping my colleague and dear friend Bill Goodenrath will be doing a class as well. And we're working on a flame working class and also a professional practice class. So I don't think, Amy, I've forgotten any. No, she's saying that happened. So we're hoping to get those up over the next couple of weeks, and it's just a way of keeping in touch with our community. We're really sad that we can't do classes this summer. It's really broken our hearts not to see our community of people, but we know we'll get back to that in the not too distant future.
Thank you.
Well, oh, Jerry, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question, if you don't mind. This is for Richard and Amy, actually. But as far as the studio, the new studio was concerned, what was the track for building it prior to COVID-19? When was it supposed to get off the ground?
Amy, do you want to answer that one? I think it might be a better one for you.
Unmute yourself, Amy, so you can talk.
Okay. Hi, everyone. We had planned to start in March 2021 and finish in May 2022. So we've pushed it out at least a year, and we'll see what happens. But we have to get it done because Richard came all the way from Australia for that. So.
And where, as far as fundraising is concerned, how far into it are you in terms of getting what you need to start the process?
So far, we've raised about $10 million, and we need about 10 more million, a little more than that, to get it going. But we've been very successful with everyone we've asked, and it feels good. We just thought when the COVID hit, we needed to take a pause because the future seemed so uncertain and people's finances were shaky. So we'll reevaluate in the fall and hope to continue then.
Thank you.
Thanks for asking that.
Richard, this is Jerry Paulson. I wanted to ask if you could expand a little more on the topic of envisioning light and shaping or guiding light. You know, I was intrigued by that picture of the rose window with all the red in the haze. And, you know, there the motes of dust are shaping or envisioning the light or visualizing the light. So can you talk about that a little more in your own practice?
Yeah, I think it's very much a phenomena that's present within the material. I've got this little block of glass here. I might hold that up, see if you can see that. I'm trying to get the light coming through it. So this is what's called a saffron, and it looks kind of blue. And if we get reflected light off it, it goes a kind of a red. And it does that because there's little particles of molecules of gold in there that have spoiled. It's what's called a spoiled gold ruby. And so that creates a field of tiny little crystals in there that are red. And so when the light hits it, it reflects off and becomes a red color. And when the light comes through it, it's reflecting backwards, but some of the light is coming around it and it looks blue. And it's not dissimilar to what happens in an atmosphere, like you've got moisture in the sky, and you can get these different effects that happen. So I'm quite intrigued by the material almost filtering light and light bouncing around within the shape. So it's something that you can conceptualize, but you also just have to work with the material. You can't plan, well, I'm not smart enough to be able to plan a work like that. I've got to try and understand, experience the phenomena, and then respond to it and sculpt it. So I'm trying to get more of this glass. It's particularly hard to make, and there's a team of people working on that right now for me. It's the kind of material that artists like Lebinsky and Brachtova have used. Generally, people don't want a spoiled gold ruby because it's something you can't do much with in regular applications. But for what I'm thinking about, it's perfect.
Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you, Richard, very, very much for today. This was fabulous. I will remind people that we post these videos on our Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass YouTube channel. So, so this will be posted later this afternoon. And Richard, thank you so much. Amy and Bill, thank you for joining us from Corning. And thank everyone for the membership in AACG. Next Friday, we have Charles Shepard from the Fort Wayne Museum with a very delightful presentation. And so thank you all, and stay safe out there. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Marilee.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Marilee.